We have Joseph presenting. You have my sword, my bow, and my axe. Player perception of oddly shaped dice for Dungeons and Dragons, please.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Oh, come on, just after lunch. Good afternoon, everybody. Hey. Okay, opening of the tabletop games session. This is now the second time that I presented at this, so I've been to every single tabletop one, so I'm well experienced now, I guess, in these. And I want to highlight that this is student work, and I would not be here today if it wasn't for Camilla, who did a lot of the work on this study and did a lot of even the design work with us on this. Last year, we were kind of looking at these odd-shaped designs, and so we've kind of continued on from there. And so that's me when I had a little bit more hair and a little bit less weight. And the big thing here is I'm working in Russia at an institution called Nautilus University, and so this is also, you know, getting out and seeing the world in board games. Last year at FDG, we were talking about oddly shaped dice of a different form. We were looking at, okay, we have two D6s, and there's all these different recastings of it. So skewed looking dice or odd shaped. And what we found was that new forms were less likely to believe to be fair. So seeing those skewed dice, players were more likely to say, well, I don't want to play with those because they're not well balanced or fair. And especially when they saw that recasting. But all of these have basically the mathematical properties of fairness. In the first case, it still has that symmetry and it rolls a 2D distribution. And on the second one, that's a D12 and a D3, and the numbers have been changed on it so that it also still rolls a 2D6 distribution. The big sales numbers, however, for dice are not for 2D6s. 2D6s, you know, they pretty much come with the board game already. What you see is a big need for this, Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of need for these kind of interesting dice for Dungeons and Dragons because the game really doesn't come with enough sets for the players, and it creates this huge, giant secondary market for goods for D&D. And what we can see is that there's a lot of different Kickstarters and dice manufacturers on the market. And they're all building kind of different sets for D&D in all colors, shapes, materials, etc. So this is just a sampling of what is out there on the market. And I'm sure that could just go on forever with all these different sets. So this creates a demand in this creator market for research. A lot of these are smaller operations. They're more mom and pop or sole proprietorships or small Kickstarter organizations where they don't have the monetary resources to go out and do human user testing or to go out and do a lot of research. That's not where their goal is. Their goal is to create something that they think looks nice. And so talking with a lot of these groups, I see that this really is a place where you can start to apply research because I have a lot of human resources. I've got students who need projects. I have people who I can do human user testing against. So that is a value add for me. And we have to remember that a lot of the big boy companies in the market there, right? You know, you talk about your TSR, the creators of D&D, and your Games Workshop, that's where they got their start, was as these small mom and pop sole proprietorship organizations when we look at this. So Games Workshop actually started out by making figures and pieces for Dungeons and Dragons and then worked out and basically developed their business model out of there. And even TSR, you know, they started somewhere. They started with these pieces. So we started looking at kind of designs of dice for D&D sets. And here's kind of, you know, that canonical D&D set. And these originally were based off of available dice at the time of D&D's creation that were used for the teaching of probability for high school students. And they were repurposed into then this new set. So this was an existing object at the time of the creation of D&D. Now, D6's much longer history there, and I'll ask you to wait until the next presentation to give you more on that history. So I don't want to bury that. Okay. We broke our study down into two groups based on their experience with the 7 die systems, and we put them into experienced players who had played some amount of D&D before, and inexperienced players. So we were able to have about 59 players go through trials with these different types of dice. And I brought both of my sets with me today so that people can actually take a look at the two ones, if you want to pass those around. And we randomized also our trials between playing the game first with the recast dice and secondly with the normal polygonal set, and then vice versa. So that way we still have some amount of experimental validity. So what two sets do we use? They're being passed around right now. So we wanted to aim at keeping consistent the things that we could keep consistent. We were mostly looking at this recasting of the dice. So we aimed to keep both color and numbering consistent in this case in order to look at the difference in the mold. And so we ended up with a Chessex set, which is kind of, you know, the big giant huge dice conglomerate. I don't know how they got Polyhero trademarked, but they do for some reason. And we think that it's a mathematical concept. So we took a look at the Chessex model 27402 ivory and black marble, and we put it up against the Polyhero dice set in parchment and black ink. So those are being passed throughout the room right now. Now, of course, they also created in all sorts of other fun and wonderful colors. I'm feeling like I'm turning into an advertisement for them today. So you can see here that the first one is just your normal polyhedral, and the second one was designed to look like objects that a wizard would use. So the one is a staff, the other one is a parchment, a scroll, the other one is a bunch of bottles here, and then there's a fireball. So all these objects are trying to kind of put that together. Just to give you a closer look at this, you know, now could I get the mold exactly, or the mold is what is changing here, but could we get the colors and everything exactly to match? No, two different dice manufacturers, etc. But I think they're pretty close. So we worked a lot on trying to find even the dice that would match up with the Polyhero set. And we're also interested in fairness based off of the previous study, that there was this question as to whether the dice themselves are fair. In terms of the canonical shapes, those probably are pretty well balanced. But then the question is, with a recasting, do you still end up with a fair die? And playing the game seemed in last study to change this perception in the player, that they would perceive it to be unfair, and after playing the game, it would become more fair. Polyhero has made statements in regards to the fairness of their dice and whether they roll to the expected outcomes. Their statement is like about yay long, and it basically is, yes, we do take this into account during our design. They even say that they take into account the weight of the ink. So when they're putting the numbers on, the larger numbers are smaller in their presentation of font, because that way they balance out the amount of ink. And this is one of the quotes from one of the lead developers on this, is that they do design them to be used, not just to be something to look at. So for this study, we're going to assume that they are fair within the manufacturing tolerances that we can get to. And we're going to look at outcomes from our players' fairness outcomes as based solely upon their perception. So we're not taking into account, are they actually rolling to the distribution? We're going to assume that that's the case. So we then went through a long playtesting period, and we had them play a modified D&D-like encounter. And this recasts the theme of D&D into being a student coming to a TA and asking for an increase in grade. So something more that the students can relate to, and also that new players can relate to. And so the rules for this encounter is all inside of the paper if you're interested. And big thing coming out of the playtesting period here when we set about this is that they found that the recasting of that made the experience a lot more fun, which is good, because if people are having fun during your playtesting, that usually means that they will stick it out till the end. And so you can actually get data out of them, and they don't just go, I quit. Done, why are you making me roll dice? Okay. In terms of our outcomes, we had basically experienced players preferred aesthetically to recast dice. That there was this kind of novelty to it, and we found that they preferred it far more than the unfamiliar participants. So unfamiliar players of D&D were more likely to just want the 7 die set. in terms of their preference, even after playing the game. So here, we basically had about half of the familiar players saying that they would prefer to play with the Polyhero dice, whereas it was more of 5 out of 29 participants saying that they would have it. And after they played, one person even changed their mind and said, no, I would rather play with the normal 7 dice set for new players. Secondly, we wanted to look into the idea of fairness. Okay. Nobody at all said that the Chessex dice were unfair. Everybody basically said before and after the play test that they believe that set to still be fair. So we're only looking here at the recast wizard dice. And what we found was that by playing the game, there was an increase in our level of people who flipped their minds to be that these dice are fair after playing the game. So we moved 8 people's positions via the act of playing. However, still 19 continued to say that they were unfair. So how does this break down across our experienced and inexperienced players? Well, inexperienced players were more likely to start thinking that they were unfair, but they changed their mind at a more significant rate than the experienced players. So in this case, we had 5 people change their minds from moving from unfair into the fair, and so we're able to find that that meets with the statistical validity. And experienced were less likely to believe that they were unfair. Well, not significant, so we're not below that p less than 0.5 point. Still about a third changed their minds in our study. So that could just be need to get a larger sample size to actually really see the effects. So I think that mostly it trends towards people after playing have this idea of fairness. Nobody, after playing, however, went from thinking that the dice, if they were fair before, were unfair after the play testing. Okay, so going back to the start, I talked all about Kickstarter developers, I talked about these small mom and pop operations. So why would they care what I'm doing as a researcher? What does this now go back, what can I go to them and say about their designs? Well, the recast dice are best suited towards the experienced player. So that to me says should we be marketing? Is that you should be targeting these more experienced players. They're more likely to find it to be aesthetically pleasing, and they're more likely to be found fair without too much difficulty. And this confirms some of the findings that we had in the previous year's paper on this idea of playing a game with an object increases perceptions of fairness. So what should a dice manufacturer be doing who wants to make these recast dice? Perhaps they should be creating YouTube videos or creating the chi-square test table that shows that, yes, our dice are fair, and advertising this, or putting people through play tests with them. And so really what I see here is where should I be marketing my Kickstarter to those experienced players, and where should I be looking to change people's minds in those inexperienced players? Why is my product better? So next steps. Well, we've only looked at one type of recast dice for D&D. As you've seen at the start, there's lots, which is, yay, more work. We can look also at the shape. How does the shape affect it? How does the theme affect? So in this case, we were looking at a student going through a retest, and then we were using wizard dice. Is that an appropriate theme to use for those dice? Or would it make more sense to try something where they're playing a wizard? Does that affect their experience? Are they more drawn into the game? And color, which I will talk about in a little while. We can look at the color of the dice and how does that affect players' perceptions. Okay, so I'm gonna stop this one here and open it up for questions a little bit early.